My name is Ashley, and I'm studying English. I wanted to share my story about my time living in New York City and tell you about my wonderful teacher. You can read about my experiences and learn English with me. It all started one beautiful summer day when I was on a train heading into the city. Two other women were sitting across from me. They were speaking English, and at that time, I didn't understand much. I had started learning English, but I was just a beginner and didn't know many words. I decided to try and talk to them, so I said a few simple things in my basic English. To my surprise, they understood what I meant. I was so happy. I told them that I wanted to learn English better. The women explained that they were from the United States and were on their way home from a conference. Our conversation lasted for about 10 minutes before my stop came up. I said goodbye to them, and they were kind enough to give me their address and phone number, inviting me to visit them sometime. After we said our goodbyes, I felt really motivated to work on my English every day. I started translating articles and watching movies in English. After about 6 months, my English had improved a lot. It was good, but I knew I wanted to learn even more. That's why I decided to go to New York City to study English there. Once I arrived, I enrolled in a language school. My first class was on a Monday. I met my teacher and the other students in the class. My teacher was a friendly young woman. We all introduced ourselves and said where we were from. Then the lesson began. Our teacher asked us a question. She wanted to know how we usually studied English. She then told us that she could teach us a very effective and simple way to learn English. She explained that we wouldn't have to spend a lot of time just studying or reading textbooks, but instead we would focus on using English a lot. This sounded great to me because I never really enjoyed just studying and reading textbooks. We then talked about what's important when learning a new language. Our teacher emphasized that we need languages to communicate, to share our thoughts, and to understand what others are saying. So, she explained that the best way to learn a new language is by using it to communicate, and that's exactly what we would be doing in her class, lots of speaking. She mentioned that many students try to memorize lists of new words and study grammar rules, but often these students don't actually use English for speaking. They learn about the language but don't use the language. Of course, she said, learning new words and grammar is important, but in this course, she wanted to show us a very simple and effective method to learn them through using the language. I really liked what our teacher was saying. The lesson continued, and we talked about our hobbies and what we like to do in our free time. We practiced speaking in pairs and with our teacher. We spent the whole lesson speaking, which I loved. I felt really happy because this way of learning seemed perfect for me. I learned that if you want to learn English well, the key is to use English for communication. I explained to the lady at the job center that I didn't have any experience with being a cleaner or a waiter. She listened and then told me that my English was actually good enough to work at a cafe. She said the training wouldn't be too difficult, and importantly for me, I would get to use English when I talked to the customers. The lady then offered me a job starting that Thursday, which was fantastic news. I was really happy to have found a job where I could practice my English. It made me think about how important it is to keep learning new words, and I remembered our teacher saying that reading for about 30 minutes every day is a really effective way to do that. The next day, Wednesday, I went back to school. There was one student in our class who was quieter than everyone else. I learned that his name was Kevin, and he was from South Korea. When our teacher asked if anyone had any questions, Kevin raised his hand. He explained that he had a big problem with his pronunciation. He knew it wasn't very good, but he wasn't sure how to improve it. He also mentioned that he didn't speak much because he felt self-conscious about how he sounded. He told us that he read a lot and watched movies in English, so he understood quite well, but he really wanted to speak more clearly. He asked our teacher if there was anything specific he could do to work on his pronunciation. Our teacher listened carefully and then said, "Okay, Kevin, I can definitely give you some advice about pronunciation and how to practice it. I also want to teach you a technique that can really help." She started by explaining why many students have trouble with pronunciation. She said that when we speak, we use the muscles in our mouths in specific ways. The challenge is that when you're speaking English, you might unconsciously use those muscles in the same way you do when speaking your native language. This can make your English pronunciation sound a bit like your first language. She reassured us that this happens to almost everyone learning English, and it's normal for a student's pronunciation to not be perfect. However, she emphasized that we can definitely improve with practice. Then she introduced us to a great technique called shadowing. She explained that shadowing is simply copying the sounds you hear. She pointed out that this is how children learn their first language, by copying their parents over and over until their pronunciation is perfect. She said we could use the same approach for English. She suggested finding a video that isn't too fast and that we can understand well. Then we just listen and try to copy exactly what we hear at the same time as we hear it. That's all there is to it. Our teacher then showed us a video online that demonstrated the shadowing technique really well. We all watched it and then tried shadowing for about 3 minutes. After that, our teacher mentioned that shadowing is also a great way to prepare for a presentation if you want to have good pronunciation. She suggested going somewhere quiet and practicing shadowing for about 10 minutes beforehand, saying it can make a big difference in your clarity during the presentation. I found this really interesting because I had never heard of this technique before. When the lesson ended, I went to the school reception desk. I wanted to know if there were any sports activities at the school because I was hoping to play some sport while I was in New York. The lady at the reception said, "Yes, we have a table tennis team and a football team. The football team has training today at 5 o'clock." I was thrilled because sports are a big part of my life. I went to the football team's training session and met a lot of players from different countries, including Brazil, Japan, Russia, Spain, Argentina, and Italy. I really enjoyed the training and felt happy that my time in New York was starting so well. I had a great teacher, and now I was making new friends on the football team. Plus, I was starting my new job the next day. I learned that if you want to have good pronunciation in English, repeating after native speakers is a really helpful strategy. Our teacher, Ms. Evans, then asked Monica if she would mind sharing her experience with the thinking aloud technique. Monica was happy to talk about it. She explained that when she first started, it wasn't easy. She began with very simple sentences, things like, "I can speak English. It's good that I can speak English. I want to get better. I need to practice every day. I don't know many words, but I can use the ones I know well. I can express my ideas with these words. I can do this. This is great. The sentences were very basic, but at the beginning she faced a challenge. Her thoughts in Italian were often long and complex, and she couldn't immediately translate them word for word into English. She realized she needed to find a simpler way to express herself in English, to actually think in simple English. This, she said, was the hardest part, but after some time, it became natural for her to think in English. Then, something interesting happened. She met a man from Australia who was on vacation in Italy. Even though she was still a beginner, they started speaking English. She noticed that she was able to communicate with him without too many problems. Her sentences were simple and short, but she could make herself understood. She wasn't constantly translating in her head from Italian to English. After meeting the man from Australia, she started using the thinking aloud technique even more. She found that it really helped her speaking skills, and she still uses it every day, considering it a very effective technique. Ms. Evans thanked Monica for sharing her experience. I was really interested in trying this technique myself because I also wanted to improve my speaking fluency. It seemed like a different approach, but if it worked for Monica, maybe it could work for me too. The key takeaway seemed to be that if you want to speak English fluently, you should try to think aloud in English. Ms. Evans agreed that it's important to do the shadowing technique correctly. She explained that we need to train the muscles in our mouths to this new way of speaking, just like training any other muscles at the gym. If your mouth muscles feel sore after 5 minutes of shadowing, it just means they're not used to it, and it's a good idea to take a short break and then continue a little later. She reassured us that with every 5 minutes of practice, our pronunciation would get better. She also pointed out that shadowing has other benefits beyond just pronunciation. It helps with intonation, the rhythm of the language, and how words connect in sentences. She acknowledged that at first, the recordings might sound very fast. If that happens, she suggested focusing on repeating just the first or the last word of the sentence. With more practice, we'd gradually be able to repeat more and more. I agreed with this. I told the class that when I first tried shadowing on Saturday, it felt quite difficult, but by Sunday evening, it was much easier to repeat what I heard. Then, I had a question for Ms. Evans. I mentioned that I had looked at the website www.grmarinals.com, and while it seemed interesting, I wasn't sure which level was right for me because I didn't know how many English words I actually knew. Ms. Evans asked the other students if they had any idea how many words they knew. It was surprising to see that nobody really knew for sure. We all knew we were at an intermediate level, but we didn't have a specific number. Ms. Evans then told us about a website designed for language learners where we could take a test to find out our vocabulary size. She said the test had only 2 simple steps, and the website was www.testlanguage.com. She suggested we could take the test every month to track our progress. I was really curious to know my vocabulary size, so I immediately took out my phone and went to the website. I found out that I knew about 2,100 words in English. It turned out that most of the students in the class knew between 2,000 and 2,200 words. Only Monica and Kevin, the quiet student from South Korea, knew around 2,500 words. Ms. Evans then explained that based on these results, when we use www.grmarinals.com, we should already understand the grammar at level 2 and could start working on the grammar at level 3, as that level was designed for students who know between 2,000 and 3,000 words. She encouraged us to test our progress every month. The following Wednesday, back at school, another student spoke up at the beginning of the lesson. Her name was Olivia, and she said, "I've started reading more, and I can feel that it's really helping. I can already see an improvement in my grammar, but I'm having a problem." She explained that when she's reading and comes across a word she doesn't know, she looks it up in the dictionary and then continues reading. However, sometimes, just 10 minutes later, when she sees the same word again, she doesn't remember it and has to look it up once more. She asked our teacher for advice on how to remember new words better. Ms. Evans said it was a very common issue and gave us a helpful explanation. She told us that it's perfectly normal not to remember a new word immediately. Usually, you need to encounter a word about 5 times before it really sticks. Some words, especially verbs, might even take 10 or 15 repetitions. She explained that when we learn a new word, it goes through several phases in our memory. We only truly remember it well when it reaches the final phase. She then described these 5 phases. The first phase is when you see the word for the very first time and have no idea what it means, so you look it up. The second phase is when you see the word again. You recognize that you've seen it before, but you still can't recall its meaning, so you have to check the dictionary again. The third phase is when you encounter the word once more, and you start to get a general sense of what it might mean. For example, you might guess it's a type of object, an animal, or a verb, but you're not completely sure. The fourth phase is when you know the meaning of the word when you see it, but you can't actively recall it when you want to use it in your own speech. At this stage, the word is part of your passive vocabulary. The fifth and final phase is when you are able to use the word confidently when you speak. Ms. Evans emphasized that there are these 5 distinct phases, so it's clear why it's unrealistic to expect to remember a new word perfectly after seeing it only once. You need to see or hear every new word multiple times and allow it to progress through all these stages. She encouraged us to feel good not only when we fully learn a new word but also when we move from one phase to the next, as each step brings us closer to being able to use the word fluently in everyday conversations. I found this explanation really insightful. I had definitely experienced this myself, looking up a word only to forget it moments later. I often felt a bit silly when that happened, but now I understood that it's just a normal part of the learning process. It's okay not to remember a word forever the first time you see it. You need more exposure before it truly becomes part of your active vocabulary. After school, I went to my football training. Our coach told us that we had a match on Saturday. The school team would be playing against another school team from Cambridge. To my surprise and excitement, the coach asked me to play for the school team. I was really happy and started looking forward to the Saturday match. The lesson for remembering new words seemed to be that you need to see or hear a word about 10 times for it to really stick. When I mentioned the moment I started to become interested in English, Ms. Evans asked, "Can you tell us more about that moment?" I replied, "Yes. Well, First, I have to admit that English wasn't always my favorite subject. I started learning it in high school, and at the beginning, it was really tough for me. I just didn't understand the structure of the language. It seemed illogical. I tried to memorize vocabulary and learn grammar rules, but it was a struggle. By the time I finished high school, I was still only a beginner. I couldn't really speak English, and I honestly believed that I just wasn't capable of learning it, that it wasn't for me. Then I continued, but then something changed. I've always loved music, and when I was about 20, I started listening to the Beatles. I really wanted to understand the lyrics of their songs, so I began translating the words. Slowly, I started to understand more and more. Then, I had that encounter with the two ladies from England on the train. Our conversation was simple, but it really motivated me. From that moment on, I started to believe that I could actually learn English. I began working on it almost every day, and I could feel myself improving. That's what eventually led me to enroll in this school. Ms. Evans thanked me for sharing my story. She then pointed out something interesting. "Notice," she said to the class, "how Ashley's experience shows the importance of motivation." At first, she didn't have a strong reason to learn English, and it was difficult. But then she found her motivation, wanting to understand the songs she loved. You can see how crucial motivation is. When you have it, learning English becomes much more achievable. Without it, it's very hard to succeed. Ms. Evans then went around the class, asking everyone about their motivation for learning English. The stories were all quite different and interesting. One girl said her motivation was to be able to read historical books in their original English. Another student wanted to become a professional tennis coach in England and felt he needed to speak perfect English before starting his career. One woman explained that she needed English for her job at a large international company. It was clear that everyone had a personal reason, whether it was to use English in their daily lives or to access information from books and other sources. At the end of the lesson, Ms. Evans asked us if we actually liked English. I replied, "I didn't like English in high school at all, but now I really enjoy it. I can see how incredibly useful it is to know this language." Ms. Evans added that this was another important factor. She explained that when you're learning a new language, it really helps if you like something connected to it, whether it's the people, the music, the culture, or the history. If you have a genuine interest in English, it makes the learning process much easier. She mentioned that to communicate effectively in English, it's generally good to know around 3,000 words or more. If you don't enjoy the language, it's much harder to find the time and dedication to practice and reach that level. I could definitely relate to what Ms. Evans was saying. Now, I not only like the Beatles but also my teacher and my boss, who were both English speakers. I even started to appreciate English humor. Because of these positive connections, it was much easier for me to find time to practice English every day. On Saturday, I played football for my school team. We had some really talented players, and we won the match 3-2. We were all so happy, and we went to a local pub after the game to celebrate our victory. The important lesson seemed to be that to learn English effectively, you need to have a strong motivation to use it regularly. Ms. Evans said that it was perfectly normal. She explained that I understood English spoken with a London accent, which was what I was likely used to hearing. However, the Scottish accent was new to my ears, and they simply weren't yet trained to it. She reassured me that what happened could happen to anyone. When you speak English at a certain level and then encounter a region where people have a significantly different accent, it's common to have trouble understanding at first. She said it's okay and that it usually takes about 2 weeks for your ears to adjust to a new accent. She advised me not to think there was something wrong with my English. With practice, my ears would eventually become accustomed to the Scottish accent. I then asked, "So, what can I do to understand the Scottish accent better? I don't exactly live in Scotland." Ms. Evans suggested that I could try watching films or situation comedies featuring Scottish English. She said that by listening to it more, I would soon start to understand. I thanked her for the advice. After school, I went back to work. Around 4 p.m., 2 other interesting customers came into the cafe. This time, they weren't from Scotland. They were clearly foreigners wanting to buy coffee. They were 2 ladies, and it was obvious that their English was very basic. My boss was serving them, and when she realized they didn't understand English very well, she did something really clever. She changed the way she spoke, using very simple sentences with only 3 or 4 words. I could see that the ladies understood her. They ordered 2 coffees, 2 sandwiches, and 2 cakes. They seemed happy, and my boss was happy too. After the ladies left, I told my boss that it was very kind of her to simplify her English so that the 2 ladies could understand. My boss explained that sometimes she has to speak in very simple English. She said it doesn't matter if the customers speak English well or not. They are our customers, and we have to do everything we can for them. She believed that if they felt they could communicate in our cafe, they would be more likely to come back every day. I thought my boss was a smart businesswoman. She always did her best to make our customers happy. It was true that we had a lot of regular customers. Our cafe was busy every day. The lesson here seemed to be that if you want to understand people with a specific accent, it's helpful to listen to audio featuring that accent for a while. Ms. Evans' words really resonated with me. I also sometimes felt shy when speaking English. I knew I needed to practice more, but in certain situations, I was afraid of sounding foolish, so I didn't speak as much as I could. I decided right then to be braver in those moments and use them as opportunities for more practice. Then another student, David, spoke up. He said, "Sometimes when I'm trying to say something, I just can't think of the specific word I need. I get stuck and don't know what to do. It makes me feel really stupid, and then the next time I have a chance to speak English, I don't want to because I'm afraid of being in that awkward situation again. Can you help me with this?" Ms. Evans replied, "David, when you start speaking English, you have to be prepared for this one thing. There will be times when you don't know the exact word you want to use. In those moments, you need to learn how to describe the word. This ability is so important when learning a new language. You need to train yourself to express your ideas using the vocabulary you already have. For example, if you don't know the word key, you can describe it as a small metal thing for opening a door. We actually describe things we don't have the words for in our native language all the time, but we often don't realize it. If you don't know the name for something, you simply explain it to the other person so they understand what you mean. You can do the exact same thing in English, but it requires practice. The thinking aloud technique that Monica shared is actually very helpful for developing this skill. If you practice thinking aloud every day, your ability to describe things will improve. Remember, you can only truly learn English by using English. It's okay to feel shy sometimes, but you can't let it stop you from speaking. The following Monday at school, Ms. Evans asked us about the school party on Friday. One student, Emily, said that the party was fantastic, lots of drinks and fun. The girls in the class enjoyed it too. I agreed, saying I had a great time because Sophia was there. We talked and even danced together, which was really nice. 2 guys from my football team were also at the party. They were from Brazil, and their English was quite basic, mostly short sentences. But they were incredibly funny, making lots of jokes about life in New York, other players on the team, and girls from their classes. Even though their sentences were only 3 or 4 words long, they could speak quite fluently. When we were talking about the party, I told Ms. Evans, it was really interesting to see that someone who doesn't know many words can still speak fluently. I know other students who are at a much higher level, but they can't speak as smoothly. Ms. Evans explained, the 2 boys from your football team showed you a key principle. They used what they knew and focused only on what was truly important, communication. Then, another girl, Jessica, asked, so, what can we do if we want to speak English fluently, like go to parties and tell jokes? Ms. Evans replied, first, let's clarify what fluent speaking actually means. She explained that many students mistakenly think fluent speaking means talking very fast with a large vocabulary and perfect grammar. However, the more accurate definition is speaking without long pauses. Some people can achieve this with 1,000 words, others with 2,000, while some who know 3,000 words still struggle with fluency. She emphasized that the only way to improve fluency is to practice speaking. It's a physical skill, like playing a musical instrument. To play the violin well, you need to train the connection between your brain and the muscles in your fingers. Similarly, to speak English fluently, you need to train the connection between your brain and the muscles in your mouth. Ms. Evans then shared a common experience many students have, meeting a foreigner and wanting to express their thoughts in English but being unable to find the right words in the moment. Later, when replaying the conversation in their head, they realized they actually knew the words. She explained that this happens due to a lack of practice. Their speaking isn't yet automatic. To make it automatic, she recommended speaking for at least 30 minutes every day. This could be with another person, or if no one is available, through thinking aloud, actually speaking your thoughts out loud, not just thinking them silently. This practice helps strengthen the connection between your brain and your speaking muscles. Jessica said, "Yes, that makes sense." Ms. Evans concluded, if you want to speak fluently, speak for 30 minutes every day. Monica then asked Ms. Evans, "This is all so interesting. How do you know all this information about studying languages? Where did you learn it all? And where is this magic park? Can we go there too?" Ms. Evans replied, "What I'm about to tell you might not sound logical to everyone. If it seems a bit strange, I apologize, but since you asked, I'll give you my honest answer. I believe that if you have a question and you ask the universe for an answer, the answer will come. When I have a question, I go to this park. I call it my magic park. I sit on a bench, relax my body, breathe slowly, and try to quiet my mind. Then, I ask my question. Sometimes, the answer comes as a new idea in my head. Other times, someone I meet later says something that helps me find the answer. Sometimes I watch an interesting video online and find the answer there. And sometimes, the answers come the next day when I wake up in the morning. What's interesting is that the answers usually do come. I feel very happy when they do. As I said, you don't have to believe what I'm telling you, but this is what I do, and it's how it works for me. The park itself isn't far from here, only about a 10-minute walk. Many people go there to relax. It's a beautiful place with a very peaceful atmosphere. I call it my magic park because it holds a special meaning for me. Ms. Evans' words were quite intriguing to me. I had never really considered the idea that you could ask the universe for answers to your questions. Maybe someday, if I have a really important question, I might go to that park and try it myself. The lesson here seemed to be that when you're facing a challenge or need guidance, it's always a good idea to ask for help, in whatever way feels right to you. The next day, one of the girls, Sarah, asked Ms. Evans a helpful question. She said, "Thank you so much for all the information you've given us about how to learn English. Could you give us a summary? Could you provide some clear rules about what we should do every day to learn English effectively?" Ms. Evans responded, "Okay, I can give you a simple summary. If you want to speak English well, you need to do 3 things consistently: read, listen, and speak. You already know these 3 things, but what's crucial is that you dedicate an equal amount of time to each activity. If you neglect one area, your progress will likely be slower. From my experience, I can say that it's important to actively use English for about 90 minutes every day. You don't need to study in the traditional sense, but you do need to actively engage with the language." She then explained each activity in more detail. First, reading. It's good to read for at least 30 minutes every day. But remember, don't read to study English. Read to gain new information, to enjoy an interesting story. I know I've repeated this, but it's really important. Then listening. It's also good to listen to English for 30 minutes every day. Start with simple audiobooks or news recordings and gradually progress to more complex materials. Once you know about 2,000 words, you can start watching films and videos online. And finally, speaking. You already know how important speaking is when you're learning English. Aim to speak for 30 minutes every day. Of course, the best option is to speak with real people, your teacher, classmates, or friends. Try to find someone who is at your level or slightly better and practice with them. But if you don't have anyone to speak with, you can still get a lot of practice through shadowing and thinking aloud. I use these techniques myself quite often when I'm learning Spanish. Since I don't have any native Spanish speakers in my daily life, I rely on shadowing and thinking aloud to improve my fluency. So, as you can see, learning English is quite simple. All you have to do is read, listen, and speak. That's it. Now you know how to do it. Sarah thanked Ms. Evans, saying it was all very helpful. I was also very grateful that Sarah had asked for a summary, as it was my last day at the school, and I needed a clear plan for what to do after the 4 weeks I had spent learning from Ms. Evans. I felt like I had learned so much and improved my English significantly. Ms. Evans knew it was my last day, so she asked if I wanted to say anything to the other students. I told them that I was very happy to have studied in the class and that I had met a lot of wonderful people. I gave everyone my email address and encouraged them to contact me if they wanted to. Then I said goodbye to everyone. I was a little sad to leave, but I knew I had to move forward with my life. Now, it's been a year since my last day at the school. I've continued to use English every day, incorporating the techniques I learned from Ms. Evans. I now know about 4,000 words in English, which is fantastic. I also have a new job. I've started teaching English myself. I teach beginners who only know about 500 words. It's a good experience for me because I know I need a lot of practice as a teacher before I can teach at higher levels. I feel like I have a great advantage in my new job because I had such a wonderful teacher in New York. I learned so much from her, and now I'm trying to share everything I learned with my own students. I want them to be successful too. The most important thing I can tell anyone who wants to learn English is to read, listen, and speak, dedicating about 30 minutes to each activity every day.